Welcome to the Fall Agri-Food Education Experience in partnership with The Grove. In this video, we'll be talking about what many consider to be the best and most tender parts of the cow, the steaks. These come from the rib and the loin, the areas of the cow that make up the majority of its back. Of course, since cows do not stand up on their hind legs, these muscles get very little workout during the animal's lifespan, leading to a much more tender piece of meat. Some of the most common steaks that you'll find in the grocery store or butcher shop will be the strip loin, the tenderloin, the T-bone, which is actually both the strip loin and the tenderloin, just both still attached to the bone, the ribeye and rib steak, which is just a rib steak with the bone still attached, and the top sirloin. There are lots of other steaks from the less tender parts that we talked about in another video, such as the eye of round, outside round, flank, to name a few. But generally, if the words rib or loin are in the name, it will be a tender cut. Each steak has its own flavor and texture, so getting to know the different kinds is important. Ribeye and strip loin, for example, generally have good marbling, which makes them ideal for grilling. Marbling, if you're not familiar with the term, means the little white flecks of intermuscular fat. Fat adds great flavor to steaks. Top sirloin has a rich, beefy flavor, great for shish kebabs and steak fajitas, and while the tenderloin is hands down the most tender cut of the cow, but also the most expensive. Some chefs will swear that the strip loin is the best, some prefer ribeye. There's really no single right answer. It all comes down to personal preference and other factors such as what is being served with, what is available, and what your budget is. The first thing chefs look for in a steak is the grade. In Canada, the highest grade of beef is called prime, followed by AAA, AA, and single A. Most beef found in grocery stores was labeled grade A or higher. There are other grades from B all the way down to E, but these cows make up a small percentage of the beef market and are not usually used for human consumption. Instead, they go to other products such as dog food. There is no need to only buy a prime or AAA steak. Grade A can be a great cut of meat. It may just not have quite as much of the marbling and would be better suited for marinating or a steak that you would cut into pieces for a stir fry. The next thing chefs look for is actually one of the main factors inspectors take into account when grading beef. It's that marbling that I mentioned earlier. The little veins of the intermuscular fat running through the meat, not to be confused with any large fat deposits. Generally, the more marbling you see in the meat, the more juicy and tender it will be. What makes marbling so important is that while the steak cooks, all of this fat will melt or render, making the steak juicy and allowing the muscle tissue to slide apart more easily during slicing and chewing. Steaks are somewhat unique and versatile in terms of how you actually cook the meat, in that they don't have to be cooked all the way through to avoid foodborne illness, like chicken or turkey. Some restaurants even serve a dish called steak tartare, which is actually steak served completely raw. But it must be prepared a special way from extremely fresh and high-grade meat, so please don't try it at home. When cooking steak for yourself or others, it's important to know how everyone likes their steaks done. Steaks can be enjoyed into different levels of doneness, meaning different levels of how thoroughly the meat is cooked. There's rare, medium, and well, and all points in between. The most common being medium or medium rare. As with everything else, it comes down to personal preference and how you like your steak done. Rare steak measures 135 degrees Fahrenheit, medium at about 150, and well done 160. There are many different ways to cook steak. It can be done on a grill, in a broiler, in a pan, all with different kinds of techniques. I'm gonna do mine in a cast iron pan so that I can get a nice crust and still baste with some of the juices. At least 20 minutes before you cook the steak, you want to season your meat. It's important to do it ahead of time rather than right before cooking, as it gives the salt a chance to fully absorb into the meat and season it all the way through, not just on the surface. Don't be shy, seasoning adds flavor. The first thing I want to make sure of is that the pan is extremely hot. This will create a wonderful crust on the outside called the Maillard reaction. When you are adding the meat to the pan, the noise is very important. I want it to be loud because that means that the meat is searing. If your pan is quiet, you likely don't have the heat high enough. After about 4 minutes, I'll turn the steak over and allow it to keep cooking. But to get some more flavor into it, I'll add a bit of butter, a crushed clove of garlic, a few sprigs of thyme. As the butter melts, it mixes with any juices from the meat, and I can baste all that flavor over top. If you're cooking a T-bone, strip loin, or any other steak with a fat cap, I can turn it onto the side and melt that fat and incorporate it into the basting liquid. It's important not to move your steak around too much, as if you move it, you won't get that nice crust we talked about. Try to keep it as still as possible, at least for the first 4 minutes. To check the doneness of the steak, the most accurate way is to use a thermometer. But if you don't have one handy, you could go by touch. If you take your index finger and touch it to your thumb and poke the heel of your hand, that kind of texture is the feel of a rare steak. If you do the same with your middle finger, that will be medium rare. And then medium for the ring finger, and finally, your pinky will be well done. This steak here is medium rare, so I'll take it off at this point. Because we want to make sure we maximize the juiciness of the steak, instead of serving it straight out of the pan, we allow the meat to rest for a couple of minutes after cooking. While the meat is cooking, the heat makes all the muscle fibers tense up and squeeze the juices out. If we were to cut into the steak hot off the grill, the juices would spill out onto the plate and the steak would be that much drier. Think of the meat like this sponge here. As it cooks, the liquid gets squeezed out, but as it cools slightly, it begins to reabsorb the liquid back in. Not 100%, but enough to make a difference in the end result. Now, let's try some steak. Wow, the flavor in this is incredible. It's so juicy, and the butter, the herbs, and garlic bring so much rich flavor to complement this. You can use this method to cook any type of steak at home, and while the weather is still warm and nice, try cooking your steak outdoors on the barbecue.